Hi, I'm Michael Weber, Artistic Director of Chicago's Porchlight Music Theater. Welcome to the Movie Musical Monday podcast. This series of recorded conversations explores all our favorite film musicals, from Broadway adaptations to Hollywood originals, as our rotating host and guest conversationalists open a discussion in which you are invited to participate. Today's movie musical is the 1950 film adaptation of the 1946 Broadway production Annie, Get Your Gun, with an all-star cast including Betty Hutton, Howard Keel, Louis Calhern, Keenan Wynn, Bene Venuta, J. Carrol Naish, and Edward Arnold. Today's host is actor Jason Richards, who has appeared on the Porchlight stage in The Gifts of the Magi, Mac and Mabel, and Anyone Can Whistle, among others, and his guest is Elya Faye Bottiger, who has appeared with us in Little Me and Gypsy. Let's go to the conversation.
Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see everybody's smiling faces. We're going to have so much fun discussing this crazy musical. One of my favorite scores of all time, especially for classic musicals, I think. And such an interesting choice because it just has so many deep layers to pull apart once you get into the storytelling aspect of it. And I think we were talking with Michael before, this might be the first time that a host and a special guest have been on the same Zoom screen with my girlfriend and constant quarantine partner, Julia, over here. She's absolutely obsessive about this show. I've known from the first moment that we started dating, and I'm so excited to be here. I just want to give, before we jump into it, just a little bit of a background about how I came to the show. My parents, who should be jumping on this call any minute, if not, I'm going to call them. But they took me to New York City when I was 19, and I was first starting off in college as a musical theater actor. And they took me to a triumvirate of Broadway shows, the first, of course, being what every young man wants to see as their first Broadway show, Jekyll and Hyde, starring Sebastian Bach. And of course, then once I flushed that performance out of my brain forever, we went to go see Kiss Me Kate with Brian Stokes Mitchell and Marin Mazzie, but Marin Mazzie was out that performance. And I just remember opening up the playbill and pulling out the little sheet of paper telling me that she was out. And I was so angry because although I enjoyed the show, I was just like, how can a Tony Award nominated actress just be out of the show when I paid full ticket price? So little 19-year-old Jason marched across Broadway to the Marquee Theater to the poor girl who was running the box office there. And I was like, is Bernadette Peters going to be in Annie, Get Your Gun tonight? And she was like, yes, crazy boy. She is going to be in the show tonight. And so I let my parents give her all the money, and they they took it, and it just changed what I thought of as a Broadway show forever for me. Just seeing this huge brassy, brash Broadway star just kill it, and the amount of goodwill that was being poured out to her on stage. And it was the first time I'd ever heard entrance applause, and it was just like, it was crazy. And so then after that, my parents brought me the CD, and I listened to it going back and forth at college. And then I put all of the Frank Butler songs in my book forever and ever, as Michael and I'm sure other artistic directors in Chicago all know. And then I met Elya, and I saw this picture in her apartment, and I was like, who is that? And I had no idea. I'd never heard of Betty Hutton before in my life. And she was like, have you not seen the movie To Annie, Get Your Gun? And I said no, and she showed it to me immediately and told me that it was one of her favorite things of all times, and we got to share that together as one of our first dates. And so I just want to throw it over to you. Why are you so obsessed with this musical?
Oh my goodness, where to begin? Well, when I was 6 years old, my dad was doing a community theater production in Kansas City at this beautiful giant outdoor theater. And he played Frank Butler, and my dad had never really done any type of theater. And especially this community theater had 2,000 seats available. So it was a big deal in Kansas City. And when he worked on it, it was just magical. To all of a sudden, my dad became a different person, and it was my introduction to theater. And then not only that, but then he also sang "There's no business like show business," and I got the bug. And then we got the movie at home, and then I saw Betty Hutton, and my life changed. I had never seen a woman be so quirky on stage. You know, I had never seen a woman be so awkward, or the way that she wasn't afraid to growl with her voice, but the way that she also wasn't afraid to be delicate with her voice. And I was an awkward little Irish German girl, and watching her in the beginning with how she looked with her hair that was all wiry, and then watching her throughout the movie, all of a sudden she comes into her own, and she was determined, and she didn't let anybody stop her, but she also knew what she wanted, and she also wasn't afraid of being in love. So even though I loved Disney's Cinderella, there wasn't anything that compared to Frank Butler holding Annie during They Say It's Wonderful. And so I fell in love with the movie, and the movie has constantly been something that I can put back on, and I can remember why I decided to become an actress and why I love doing the art that we do. So I love this movie so much, and I can't wait to talk with all of you about what you think of this movie. One thing that I will say is that the older that I've gotten, the more the flaws that I've seen. When I was in second grade, we were studying Native Americans, and my second grade teacher let us all pick our Native American name. And I, of course, picked Little Sure Shot. And I was so excited. And then all of a sudden she was like, "Do you know the real story of Annie Oakley?" And I started researching, and I started reading children's books about Annie Oakley. And I was like, "This isn't the story of Annie Oakley. It happened like this." And it was so upsetting to me that that wasn't quite it. So I revisited it again when I was doing AP US history in high school. We got the opportunity to do a biography of our choice, and I chose Annie Oakley again. And while I was doing research, again, I was heartbroken because I loved stubborn old Frank. I thought that stubborn, thick-headed, swollen-headed, stiff Frank was just a dreamy, dreamy man. And then to find out when I actually did the research that Frank was just a loving, supportive husband was so disappointing because I wanted Annie to have to win him, you know? Upon that, I ended up falling in love with the actual story of Annie Oakley as well, and became equally as inspired.
Yeah, and let's talk about the real story of Annie, right? Because Dorothy Fields, who wrote the book and the lyrics to Annie Get Your Gun, has said that Annie and Frank were about the dullest people in the world. She's quoted as saying that. It's not my words, it's hers. And that Annie would just sit in her tent and knit, for God's sake. So how do you take this and bring that in? Because also Annie had some other things, like even though she was known as kind of this feminist hero, there were certain things about it, like she didn't even believe that women should be allowed to vote up until the end of her life. So there are like those little idiosyncrasies. So this is kind of an unabashedly tall tale. Like, they kind of wrote this bold dramatization of her life that doesn't have a whole lot of truthiness to it, right?
Not a lot of truth, but it's a fable, and we'll take it for what it is. Beginning with that, when we look at something like an American musical theater piece like this, where we take characters like Buffalo Bill Cody and Sitting Bull and Annie Oakley and Frank Butler, it's wild that we can end up changing their story completely through a musical like this. But it's fascinating to watch it be taken back. For example, with Unsinkable Molly Brown, they ended up looking back on that musical, and recently they had a revival where they rewrote parts of it to fit closer to Molly Brown's actual life. And my prediction is that in the next 50 years, somebody's going to come back and use the music from Annie Get Your Gun and fix up some of the issues, like cutting the number, which has been cut from the revival version of I'm an Indian Too, which I can't wait to discuss. But it's been fascinating to learn so much about this film that I didn't even know in the past week. And I can't wait to hear what all of you have to say.
Yeah. So starting off, what was kind of your favorite number in the show? Yes, art.
Well, actually, I'll change your question slightly. My
Yeah.
What may be my favorite number is one that's not in the movie that was written later, is Old Fashioned Wedding, which I love.
Oh, yes. Yes. It was written for the 1966 revival when Ethel Merman came back in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic number.
No, it wasn't written then. It was, correct us if we're wrong, Michael. It was written for the original, but then taken out and then put back in the 1966 version.
No, it was specifically written for the 1966 version because they wanted Ethel Merman to have more material when doing the revival. And it certainly is a song that, for anybody who knows Irving Berlin, harkens specifically to a song that he wrote for Call Me Madam.
Mm-hmm.
And has this double counterpoint kind of a thing. So he decided, well, let's just use that device. Everybody loved it there. And everybody thinks it's always been part of the show, but it wasn't. It came much later in the life story.
Yeah, I can't imagine the show without that number in it. It's just one of my favorites. And also one of my favorite little stories is that when when Ethel Merman went back into the show later in life, they called it Granny Get Your Gun. But yeah, we won't go too much further with that. So I don't think we can go too much farther without discussing the elephant in the room for this movie, which is Judy Garland, right? Originating in the role of Annie for MGM, and having done 2 months of work on the show, recording multiple numbers before she was fired due to exhaustion and some drug issues and some other things like that. So has anybody gotten to see any of Judy's numbers from the show?
Look at how many hands.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. So between Judy and Betty, what do you guys think? Hugh, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I would much prefer Judy Garland.
Really?
I think, yes. Well, looking at the YouTube clips of the two of them doing I'm an Indian Too, Betty Hutton is just over the top. But it's also interesting that Busby Berkeley did the choreography for the Judy Garland version.
Yes.
You can tell he's got his fingerprints all over the place, and it's such a different number. Of course, nowadays, you wouldn't see that at all, I'm sure. Michael, if you were to try and do the show, is that part of the license? Do you know?
Well, there are two versions of the show available, even though there were actually 3 versions of the show. And I'll let Ilya and Jason talk about maybe the first version. They do license the 1966 revival version that was with Ethel Merman and Jerry Orbach and
Ray Middleton.
Ray Middleton, I think was in the first one. I remember if he was in the 66, but we'll figure that out. And then they also have the version that Jason was talking about that Bernadette Peters did. So they have 2 totally different versions of the show, which are done. Both of them are done frequently. The 66 version was done at Ravinia just a few years ago with Patti LuPone. So it's still done.
And is that the same version as the revival, where it's kind of the show within a show?
That would be the version you saw with Bernadette Peters. The version that they did, the 1966 version, is pretty much what the movie is for the most part, except that it has Old Fashioned Wedding.
Yes. But what do you think of those early clips with Judy in them?
Well, actually, Hugh and I are on polar opposites of that scale. I love how over the top Betty Hutton is, but I also respect Hugh's point of view, where I think that when Judy plays Annie, she comes at it from a very honest perspective, and Betty Hutton 100% comes over the top and full of it and very goofy, very, very goofy, and almost and like bigger than life goofy, unreasonably goofy. But she was also known for being so high energy. And there's a certain way that on the camera, like when she does You Can't Get a Man, she just like floats throughout the camera all the way. And like her movements, she just keeps going. She doesn't, Amanda knows that's exactly it. She does the weird leg thing. Or one of my favorite moments is when she does I got the sun in the morning, the moon at night. When she picks up the train of her dress and she puts it between her legs, and then she like waddles down, and then all of a sudden she turns into like this beautiful goddess going across the floor. She comes at it from, she's a personality playing a character. So she's Betty Hutton playing Annie Oakley versus I think that Judy Garland in those clips comes at it more from being, I think that Judy Garland's a great actress. And I think that she decided to be Annie.
Yeah, the heads of studio had pretty much looked at all of her footage and said, she hasn't quite found it yet. You know what I mean? She didn't even have like the accent going on. They, everybody kind of says she looks very tired and ready, because Howard Keel at the beginning of production fell off of his horse and injured himself. And Judy was supposed to get some time off in between her productions. And then, Howard Keel was supposed to take on the bulk of it at the beginning. And all of a sudden, all the shifting of all of the filming moved to Judy when it was not supposed to. And so she kind of got caught up in that and just overworked and exhausted. And I kind of feel, you got to feel for her.
Oh, of course you got to feel for her. I mean, it's Judy Garland. Once again, Judy Garland got gypped, which is completely unfair. But in her defense, though, I will say that I love how her voice sounds in the numbers so much. Yeah. And I like the kids that they picked for her doing what comes naturally. And I feel sorry for them that they didn't get their big Hollywood break.
Does anybody else have a team to pick for Betty and Judy? Yes, Chuck and Diane.
I'll pick Betty. Mm-hmm. I thought she was funny. and I didn't think Judy Garland was in the couple of clips I saw. And I don't think she ever would have been. I love Judy Garland.
Yeah.
Not for this role.
Yeah, I know. I kind of felt that too. Art, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I also would take Betty Hutton, but one interesting thing was when I first watched the clips, my initial reaction before I went further into it was, who would believe Judy Garland as this Wild West person? Yeah. And then I watched the PBS special on Annie Oakley, and as you were saying before, turns out she was this petite woman who, and Judy Garland actually looked a lot more like her than Betty Hutton did.
And with that kind of, you're not used to seeing Judy with that kind of hair too, really like blunt hairstyle that she had. And she wasn't the only one too, because she was supposed to be reunited with her co-star of The Wizard of Oz, Frank Morgan, who played the wizard in The Wizard of Oz, was supposed to be her Colonel Buffalo Bill. And I believe filmed a little bit of the movie before he died tragically of a heart attack and they had to replace him. Yes, Chuck and Diane.
Yeah, he did actually film at least one scene that I saw where he was there.
Yeah.
I just happened to find the name of, it's Bruce Yarnell, I think, who was in that 1966 production.
Yeah.
I don't know who he is.
Yeah. So having gotten to watch this, what do you guys think are the reasons that this movie has lasted such a long time in all of our memories? Yes, Chuck and Diane.
I have to say it's the songs. I mean, after that movie, I don't know why, but I knew all the lyrics. I mean, it would carry me through forever because everything was fine in the movie and I really enjoyed it. But forever, I would know the lyrics. I mean, that's the way it was.
The probably songs we heard all our life.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. James, how about you?
I think I was, just to spin off what Chuck and Diane were saying, I came to Annie Get Your Gun like the opposite way, where I was probably like a teenager, late teenager, and I knew all the songs, but I didn't know they were all in Annie Get Your Gun. So it's all of a sudden when you have I Got the Sun in the Morning and you have Anything You Can Do and It's No Business Like Show Business, as you're watching it, it's like going to see a concert of like your favorite band where all of a sudden you know every single song.
Right.
So I think that's a part of it, is that these songs have become such a part of like the American tapestry of like American music theater, but also back in the day when songs would pop over, pardon the expression, to pop music. So all of a sudden, like songs we sang like in elementary school, and then songs that my parents would sing in the house while we were cleaning on Saturday morning, I'm like, oh, they're all in this one movie. That's incredible.
it's kind of crazy to think that Irving Berlin didn't even want to write the music for this eventually, or originally, because he had never written a book musical before or music that had fit within a story. He would always do it for a review or something like that, right?
Yeah, and then Jason shocked me when he told me the other day that he wrote "There's No Bit" that Irving Berlin, not Jason, that'd be hilarious. That Irving Berlin wrote "There's No Business Like Show Business" in 3 days. Can you imagine? 3 days for a masterpiece like that. But honestly, it's Irving Berlin, and he was on Tin Pan Alley forever. So I'm sure that at that point, he was like, my gosh, another song about musical theater. Here we go. I'll roll this one out.
Yeah, he did that one, Doing What Comes Naturally. And I think one more. And he just went away, and they were like, just go think about it, just think about it. And he came back and just had all those amazing songs and handed it to him, and they were like, there you go.
And it came out that way because Dorothy Fields, who had the brainchild of Annie Get Your Gun to write the book, was the one who went to Jerome Kern originally and asked Jerome Kern if he'd be interested in the project, but Jerome Kern died, so Irving Berlin ended up replacing him and writing this piece. And then Jason also told me this past week, that when the music came out and when the show opened, reviewers thought that the music was the music of yesterday. They thought that it was boring and repetitive and the same thing that they had heard in the past.
Old-fashioned for its time. And then Irving Berlin was like, yeah, they're good old-fashioned hits, which they ended up being. Amanda, I don't know, did I see your hand up earlier?
You did. And
Super.
Like everyone else, I think the music is what made me love it forever. But also, I vividly remember the first time I saw it was at a place called Stages in St. Louis. And I was like,
yeah, I've been there before,
yeah, it's a great theater. They do great productions. I was very young. I can't remember how old. And I remember the music, like I was transported. I loved it. And then the ending happened. And, my parents raised a good feminist. And my little kid self was just sitting there like, wait, what just happened? Yeah. And so then it became like my least favorite musical. And so then when I was like, oh, we're going to watch Annie Get Your Gun. Okay. I can't wait to tell them why it's my least favorite musical. And then I watched the clips. I was like, oh, right. But I love this song. Oh, I love this song. And so then I was like, okay, it's definitely not my least favorite musical. Like, it's definitely one of my favorite musicals. I just wish some things were different.
I know. It is. It's always tough for me at the end of the movie to see her give up for Frank. You know what I mean? And that's also something that they switched in the revival. Where Annie kind of, makes the shots and then, throws the whole shooting contest to Frank. In the revival, he says, well, you know what? I know that you threw the thing. So shoot 5 more off. And then he misses 5. And then they call it as a tie for the both of them. And I kind of just loved that because it put them back on equal playing fields together.
We had this argument the other night, though. I like the idea of Annie just always knew that she was better. And she was like, you know what? It's okay. But I agree, Amanda. This movie, I ended up actually, long story short, I grew up loving Howard Keel. Like, I would have given anything for Howard Keel. He was my dream man. And I was heartbroken to find out that he grew up the same way that 7-year-old Elya did. And I loved The Girl That I Marry. I thought that it was so beautiful. And I dreamed of getting older, and I dreamed of having manicured nails and looking beautiful and purring like a kitten on a man. And and then
hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, right. I never do that. And so then I was heartbroken when I learned in my early dating life that behaving the way that Annie behaves in this movie does not make for a good relationship. And I was so heartbroken and so upset because not only was I majoring in musical theater at the same time with the dream role of Annie, that I was furious and angry at Betty Hutton. And I had a headshot that my parents had beautifully given me of hers hanging up in my dorm room. And I was furious. And then I ended up deciding that I'd minor in gender studies. And I actually ended up pursuing a project where I taught children Annie Get Your Gun and used Annie Get Your Gun as a way to talk about how it is not okay that we refer to Native Americans the way that we refer to them in the movie, that it's inappropriate. And then also explaining what misogyny is to first through fifth graders by using this show. And then also describing to them how in The Girl That I Marry, painting to them a picture of what history painted as a perfect woman of the time. And then talking about going decade by decade in musical theater and bringing up what beauty has been and then what beauty is now. And so I feel very similarly to you, Amanda, where I was heartbroken when I discovered that this movie does have a lot of themes that don't completely support women, but it was so hard for me to believe that a movie like this wouldn't support women when it's about a woman who is pushing the boundaries of her time.
Yeah. I get yes, Amanda. Yes, please.
Well, just like we're on the same page, and I think watching it this time around, I gained an appreciation for just appreciating it at the time, and for appreciating this, like it was made before, like the movie is set even farther back. So it's like, it was a very feminist thing.
Yes.
Even suggests that a woman could be better at shooting a gun. Right. You know, so like that in itself was groundbreaking. And now, you know, we're like, well, obviously a woman can shoot better than a man. Why is she a weak man who can't acknowledge that? And it's like, well, that's just baby steps. Like we can't, you know, and that wouldn't have gotten produced.
That part of the story is true. You know, the part where she was just flat out better than him. That is the part where you can be like, that is true. That happened. And I kind of love that about it. But yes, Doug?
Yeah, actually, this movie was not an anomaly at all in Hollywood for the 30s, 40s, and 50s. There were a lot of strong women characters, you know, Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, Katharine Hepburn, but almost always they took the turn that this one does right at the end, where they give up the career to become Mrs. Man's Name. So historically, this fit in. And then the 60s came in and the studios went out and that began to change.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I didn't realize that. Yeah, Ken.
Yeah, I was going to say this reminds me of in Wonderful Town, there's a song, was it like 37 Ways to Lose a Man?
100 Easy Ways to Lose a Man.
100 Easy Ways to Lose a Man. And I think it is. I agree with Amanda. It's kind of like a pre-feminism that I know I'm better than the man.
Yeah.
And the audience knows it. So that's as far as we can take it here.
That's a good point.
That's it. That's exactly what I was trying to say the other night. Thank you, Ken.
That's an excellent point. All right. I just needed like 9 other opinions and now I get it. Leslie, yes.
Hi. I know we're talking about the movie, but it's hard to forget that, you know, this was created for the Broadway stage.
Yes.
And it was created for star vehicles back then. You know, they had something they wanted to write for Merman. The fact that the power for the ticket sales was a woman, the thing that was driving the success of the show, besides the fantastic score, was a woman who was a star. So I think that's part of when you're looking at historical perspective in general, and you're trying to have a conversation. This speaks to what you were speaking to, Amanda, as well, because you're dealing with younger people. You have to put it in historical perspective.
Absolutely. I see that. You had your hand up?
Yes. My name is Gideon. And so I want to say my book club is just now reading the book Suffrage, which is a history of the suffrage movement.
Yes.
How many years did it take from the time there was a very first meeting of groups of women to the time the women got the vote? 72 years.
Oh, good. You have the answer. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So, and unbelievable what conditions they were in the middle of the 19th century. Yeah, they would a married woman would work, all of her money would belong to her husband.
Mhm.
She could not buy land or apartment or any real estate. Conditions, and not only didn't she have a vote, she didn't have really much say. She couldn't be on a jury. So it seems to be really, really, really terrible from our perspective. But
Yes.
that's what history is. And so here it's halfway, but clearly the past was very, very different from what we have today.
Oh,
Mhm,
absolutely.
absolutely.
We have Chris Pazanik says Elya as Ruth Sherwood, please and thank you from Wonderful Town. I would have to agree with him on that. Carol Gordon says the smartest character is Sitting Bull.
Yeah, I love that about the way that Dorothy Fields wrote it. Today I was doing some research on the Lakota Sioux tribe that Sitting Bull was from. And Sitting Bull actually didn't join Buffalo Bill's Wild West show until he had already been up in Canada for a few years after the Battle of Little Bighorn. And the only reason that he came back was he could come back into the States if the clause was that he had to be part of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. And some accounts say that Buffalo Bill and Sitting Bull really got along. There's some really awesome footage on YouTube if you look the two of them up where they're signing to each other. I don't know, it's more than likely definitely staged. But then some accounts say that Buffalo Bill and Sitting Bull didn't get along. But one of the accounts that I read about today, which was from a newspaper article with an interview of Sitting Bull himself, was that Sitting Bull, in his travels, the American government was hoping that he would see, with the Wild West show, they were hoping that he would see the society in America and be impressed. And Sitting Bull actually was the one who was completely unimpressed because he was like, you have poor people on the streets that need food and money. And when you go to these cities, you see them. So again, historical context. And then not only that, but he was disappointed in how Americans at the time treated their children. In the Lakota Sioux tribe, you would never hit a child. And he couldn't believe how often at the Wild West shows he would see a parent hit their child. And then to be so grateful that Dorothy Field in the 40s, when she was writing Annie, Get Your Gun, chose to let Sitting Bull, even in the original version, he's a wise man who looks after Annie. And Annie and Sitting Bull had a great relationship. And Annie was furious when Sitting Bull, in actual life, ended up getting murdered by the Indian police at the time because of a mix-up. And she was so angry. And she said back then, Annie, Get Your Gun, in a newspaper article when Sitting Bull was killed, said that if he had been a white man, there would have been a national trial for him, but instead there was nothing. So I think that it's amazing that their relationship is still kept in no matter what version we see of Annie, Get Your Gun, we still get to see the wise father figure that he became for her.
Although one of the worst things that I learned today was that the guy who plays Sitting Bull in the movie is white. He's an Irish actor, and that like blew my mind today.
Mine too.
Yeah, I was just like, "Who that was?" Hugh Spencer. Earlier, did you have something to say?
Yeah, going on what Chuck and Cindy said, back in those days there was the hit parade, and songs from Annie, Get Your Gun, as well as other shows, would show up constantly on the hit parade.
Yes.
No wonder we knew all the lyrics. In fact, I think every week we got a different one on Doing What Comes Naturally.
Oh, one of my faves. That's my only, one of my few complaints other than the Native American stuff with the movie is that just like, I wanted more of the songs in the show. Like Moonshine Lullaby isn't in there. Like that is just like one of the most gorgeous songs in the whole show. And what's the
they shot Betty Hutton singing I Got Lost in His Arms, and it's beautiful. It's honest and gorgeous, and she has this gorgeous blue hat that just glows in the rainy dew, and they didn't put it into the movie, didn't make the cut, which is heartbreaking. But again, it's on YouTube if you're interested, and I Got Lost in Her Arms with Betty Hutton. It's beautiful.
How does everybody, so we've talked a lot about Annie, how does everybody feel about Howard Keel as Frank? Because I didn't know about him. Ooh, I see some movement. I see some like big grand gesture. Leslie, you had the biggest grand gesture, I think.
I'm in agreement with you. Is it your girlfriend or your wife sitting there?
Girlfriend.
Girlfriend. Very nice.
Who knows by the end of this? But
Yeah. Oh, keep
no,
talking.
just
Keep talking.
you can stop
You
right
can
there.
stop right there. Yeah.
Okay, anyway, Leslie.
He's just in every film that he's ever in. He's one of those people that has stardust on him. He's one of those people that the camera loves.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't hurt that he's a good actor and he has a beautiful voice and he's singing for himself. You know, it's not somebody dubbing him like Marnie Nixon had to do with so many wonderful musical film actresses. So I agree with your girlfriend there. He's filled with sex appeal. That's what he is.
Yeah.
And that voice is very warm and expressive.
And as over the top as and I say that in a good way, as Betty Hutton is in that movie, her scenes with him and just like when she melts into his arms, you know, like I'm kind of like, I see one number and I'm like, oh, that's so much. And then like just her scenes with him are just so like touching, and like the way she looks at him, even though they really did not get along on the set of that movie at all. Right?
Yeah. Howard Keel said that Betty Hutton was more interested in her career than starring in a movie with other actors.
Yeah, and I think the guy who played Buffalo Bill went up to Howard Keel and he was like, "She's stealing all these scenes from you. You know that, right? Like she's stealing them right out from under you. Just stir in the pot, Colonel Buffalo Bill. What are you gonna do about that?"
You'd think that the guy who played Charlie would do that,
yes,
right?
Right. That was his job. Leslie, did she have something?
She just to finish that thought. She tried to steal by chewing the scenery. And this was the discussion you had earlier that I didn't participate in, but I'm afraid I wouldn't be on her side. You know, I think it's not ensemble acting, shall we say?
Yeah. And she was also really worried because the cast, she says, was very cold to her when she showed up to shoot the movie, because they were all really hoping for Judy Garland. You know, they'd shot so many movies with her and they loved her, and she kind of felt on the defensive, right? She wrote about that later.
She did. But then what's funny is then when they did a screening of it later in her life, when she was alive, she didn't attend the screening, but all of the people who were at that screening who had been on the crew raved about working with her.
Yeah.
So, Betty Hutton, one night backstage at Gypsy, I was telling Michael how much I loved Betty Hutton, and Michael burst my Betty bubble by telling me that Betty Hutton ended up in her older age having a pretty awful drug problem, and she became uncontrollable on stage. He had me watch a video of her playing Miss Hannigan in one of the revivals of Annie, and she's out of control. Like, I felt horrible for the little girl playing Annie in that production, because you watch her on stage and she yells every single word. So I have a feeling that she was coming from a family of artists, because her sister was an actress too. And I'm sure that she had a lot of pent up fear of losing her career in a time when studios so quickly were picking up and dropping. And I have no doubt that she was addicted to the stardom, because even when you watch her on stage, I mean, like, I think that the most honest performance that I've ever seen of Betty Hutton's, and I love Betty Hutton, I've tried to see everything I could possibly get my hands on of hers. The most honest that I've ever seen her be is in the reprise of There's No Business Like Show Business, when she looks at herself in the giant poster and she does the slow take and turnaround. It is so honest for somebody who's so typically over the top, and for somebody who's so chewing the scenery is the best way to describe Betty Hutton. But all of a sudden, she looks directly into the camera, and they even, once the music cuts out in the movie, they hold it on her in silence for like 4 more seconds. And it's, I have no doubt, after I learned about her very sad ending to her life, that in that moment, you can see her hunger for stardom and the sad risk of what became in her life, the addiction to the screen. You know? And
then she can turn around and look at Frank Butler and sell this moment. Somehow. I don't know how she does it. I think it's time for one of my favorite questions. And I have to preface this by saying that after Judy was fired, they had Betty Garrett, Betty Grable, Doris Day was considered for the role of Annie, and a very famous one, Ginger Rogers, who said in her autobiography later in life that she pushed really, really, really hard to play Annie. She said she would even have done it, signed the contract for $1 to play Annie on screen, but that they came back to her and said,
they told her, the producers at MGM told her that she should keep her high heels and stockings on. Ouch. And that she couldn't handle a role like Annie. Isn't that horrible? I know.
So, and even Ethel Merman, I think was
oh yeah, no, Ethel Merman was so interested, but she had been such a nightmare to work with in the past, like the Anything Goes TV special. She was so disappointed with how she looked on camera that they were like, we're not going to invest all this money in you being Annie for the movie, and then you be disappointed in the product and give us bad press. So they completely cut her out of it.
Crazy. So let's do some casting for Annie and Frank. Does anybody have somebody from today or even from yesteryear who they would love to see? Doug, yes?
Well, if you count yesteryear, I think they should have contacted Warner Brothers and gotten Doris Day. I think she would have been the best. And in fact, she did her own version of it, Calamity Jane, a couple years later with Howard Keel. But I think she would have been the best Annie.
Yeah, I do have to say, because, you know, if you do a little digging, you can find the entirety of the revival from '99 with Reba McEntire. And as much as I loved Bernadette Peters in that role, Reba McEntire killed it. And it was just because, like, it fit her, like it was like sliding into a pair of warm jeans. That's not it. That's not the phrase, but it was like sliding into a pair of well-worn jeans.
Well, okay.
I think it's yes.
Well, we found it eventually.
But she was just so awesome in the role and just like changed it completely. And everybody was like, she should have gotten a special Tony Award for it. Like, you know, it didn't happen, sadly. But so I've always wanted to see somebody who's, you know, a country music star in the role. And I want to see young Dolly Parton do it so badly. That would be my choice for Annie if I could go back. I guess she could do it nowadays. Why not? I mean, if Ethel Merman
Granny, get your gun.
Granny, get your gun.
Yeah, that would be my pick too. I think.
Oh, really? We agree
yeah.
on something.
And then I have a Chicago actor that I want to play Frank Butler. I think that Brandon Springman should play Frank Butler.
Oh yeah, he'd be a good one. Anybody else? Oh, Chris Pasternak.
I've used this one already, but I can't help. Ever since we learned that he could sing so well, I would like to see Jake Gyllenhaal in just about every musical.
He already
played a cowboy in Brokeback. He certainly could sing it. He still looks so young. You know what I mean? If he feels like one of those people who hasn't aged a day, and ideally, I think you'd want maybe a few more years on your Frank Butler. But
that's okay.
I would love to see him.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. We got Robin says Hugh Jackman as Frank.
Oh, Hugh Jackman would be really good. That's a great one.
Megan Hilty, Leslie says.
Oh, yeah.
Leslie, did you know that Megan Hilty actually played it in Encores? She played, and Andy Carl played Frank Butler in that production. There's a couple little clips on YouTube if you check it out. Megan Hilty and him sing Old Fashioned Wedding. I think that's the one that's on YouTube.
It's really darling too. I love Megan Hilty. She'd be perfect for that.
Who else do we got? I missed one from Amanda that said that cow suit. I'm assuming that's from a different thing than that you don't want to see a cow suit play Annie. Okay.
No, that was, I think Leslie said he was really attractive or like something like sex appeal. And I was like, oh yeah, the cow suit in the show, nose business, like I couldn't, that's all I was focusing on.
I mean,
the cow costume.
Let's see. Oh, Carol Goodman from a little while ago says, we watched the outtakes with Judy Garland, who was originally chosen to play Annie. She looked ill and they said she was too sick to continue. Yeah, that's, yes, Paz, did you have something else to say?
Well, Megan Hilty, because I'm thinking about the Lifetime movie she made about it with a different Broadway and Chicago actress. And if Jessie Mueller has never played Annie Oakley, I would watch that in a heartbeat.
That's crazy.
She'd be perfect. Really perfect.
Yes, Amanda, please.
Well, so I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
We all talked about how, what's her name? Who played Annie?
Betty Hutton.
Betty Hutton, thank you.
You're welcome.
How she was really over the top. And I felt like she was giving a performance that was meant for a really big stage, not film. And I guess I'm wondering if you feel, or if anyone else thinks that like the performance of Annie should be different on film versus on stage. And like, should she always be that exaggerated? Or like, what's the essence of Annie that remains the same in the film, in the stage? And then how is it different?
Wow, that is such a good question. As somebody who's wanted to play her, I feel like I should throw the question to you.
I think that there's a challenge that comes from playing a role that has such an iconic movie. And I think that she left such a taste in people's mouth for what they're looking for when they come to see Annie Get Your Gun. I think that what all of the revivals that we've mentioned tonight have shown, though, is that Annie Get Your Gun was a star vehicle for Ethel Merman, and it's a star vehicle for whoever plays Annie. And I think that one of the lessons that I've learned, at least from acting, has been that this is the perfect example of when you come to play this role, you are not being paid to be Betty Hutton play Annie. You're not being paid to be Reba playing Annie. You're being paid to play exactly who you are as Annie. And I think that you do need somebody with a strong personality, which is why I think that Jessie Mueller, Megan Hilty, all of these people that we've mentioned in the most recent moments, they're all people who have strong quirks, and they're all people who have strong personalities. And I think that as long as you bring that to this role, I think that it's important to, because Annie, realistically, all of her songs are a variety of adorable rhymes where it's constant like joke stanzas, where each little verse has a quick little quip in it. And each of her lines within the show is like straight line joke, straight line joke, straight line joke. So you need a comedian who can bounce between being completely honest and can also be completely on top of it. Because when you have songs like Doing What Comes Naturally, where the format is like A, B, A, B, and then you Can't Get a Man with a Gun, where again, it's A, A, B, B, you constantly are having to stay on your toes to give a new joke with the same exact context to the audience. To keep them on their toes. So I think that you need somebody who's going to come at it from being perfectly honest and creative and comedic. So I do agree with you that Betty Hutton's performance is definitely made for a giant theater. And whenever you put it on in a room, you can't help but look at the screen because she's just too much. But I think that in the context of any show, I think that she does need to be somebody with a lot of personality to keep the audience on their toes. Otherwise, I think that these beautiful Irving Berlin rhymes get wasted when you don't have somebody who keeps them fresh for the audience.
Michael has a really good point here. Shocker. He asks, should Annie be age appropriate because she was 15 at the time that she met Frank? So Frank was like, what, in his mid-20s?
25.
When
he was exactly 10 years older than her.
And, they kind of stretch out their romance and their battles, but Frank and Annie got together very quickly, number one, and there wasn't a whole lot he was very behind her as taking over the lead for the Buffalo Bill show right away. There wasn't a whole lot of like back and forth. But I guess more to his point, do you think she should be that young that would add a whole new level, especially in this day and age. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Yes, Hugh.
This is an interesting case of film versus stage. Now, Betty Hutton was 29 when she made this. And because of close-ups and all that, I think she looked older. But I saw the 1966 revival. Merman was 58.
Oh, you did?
You didn't care in the theater. It was just a thrill.
Wow.
Oh, that makes me happy to hear. I love Ethel Merman.
Doug, yes?
Well, to kind of counter that in a way, for this film version, you asked a long time ago what was successful about it. And I think one thing is it was so outdoorsy and athletic and horse riding. And, Betty Hutton was very agile and physical, and she could take over from the shots where the stunt woman was on a horse or whatever. And I can't imagine Ethel Merman being able to do that.
Yeah. Why do you think, I was thinking about this, why do you think that Judy Garland, she's still a household name, and somebody just as amazing as Betty Hutton just didn't quite make it to that point where everybody knows her name? Yeah, Leslie, what do you think?
Just to answer your question, I mean, you're talking about almost apples and oranges, because Judy Garland had a tremendously, first of all, long career from the time she was 12 until the day she died. And secondly, she had recording that was enormously successful as a recording artist, as a radio artist, as a concert artist, as a film artist. Mm-hmm. So when you look at longevity, you're looking at films, of course, because they play in perpetuity, but you're also looking at the rest of the career. Yeah. If you look at somebody if I mention the word Hildegard, I don't know how many people here are going to know who she was.
We got
my crowd, yay!
Yes, this is.
But that's somebody who had a career in clubs and recordings, but nothing to. She made one film in England. Nobody knows who she is. There's no legacy for that. So I think in answer to your question, there's a tremendous difference between the kind of career that Judy Garland ended up with and the kind of limited career that Betty Hutton did.
That is a really good point, and kind of the plight of the actor, don't you think, sometimes? Mm-hmm. So we're going to have to wrap up here soon, but I'd like to ask, any final thoughts about your favorite parts of the films, things that worked, that didn't work for you? Anybody have any parting shots? Yeah, Chuck and Diane.
The thing I thought about, there was no segue between certain scenes. You were here and all of a sudden you're riding on a horse.
Yeah.
There's nobody to tell you that was coming.
Yeah.
Everything kind of was out of context, but it worked. Right.
The cinematography, a lot of people said, it's just basically he pointed the camera at them, especially for the character numbers. He just pointed the camera at them and was like, go. There's not too much art in that.
I love the color of this movie, the Technicolor color of it. You just don't see movies like that anymore, where it looks larger than life and it looks like a fantasy. I also love how Betty Hutton in the beginning of You Can't Get a Man with a Gun completely addresses the camera. It hasn't happened yet in the movie, and she just looks right in, and she's like, "Here is the song."
There's nobody else there. She's
just "Here's the camera."
Down the barrel, and there's nothing.
Right?
Did you catch the part where they cut? She's about to start singing, and then they cut.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Breaks my heart every time.
Yep.
It's so confused.
Yeah.
How do they cast the Indians today?
I think that it would be important in casting to cast actual people of Native American blood and people who understand the culture. My dream, I'll share this real quick to end this with you. Number one, thank you all so much for attending this. My heart is beaming. I've wanted to work on Annie Get Your Gun since I was little. And for the past 5 years, I've thought, you know what, maybe there just is nobody out there that cares about this show. And tonight you have all sparked a new flame within my heart. So thank you. It means the world to me. My dream is to rewrite Annie Get Your Gun with the same book. And I want to write a book. I want to ditch Dorothy Fields, even though I love her and I'll give her credit. But I want to write a book that actually has to do with the real story of Frank and Annie. And I want it to have to do with, I want to use the same exact music, just put them into the new context and try to make it more of the actual story that happened, right? I'm working on it. I have a loose plot so far.
I've heard it all.
Yes.
I've heard the whole thing. It takes about 90 minutes roughly.
Yeah. But my dream come true would be that they would cast the Native American cast appropriately with people who really understand the culture And I think that is completely doable. And I think that we could do our country a great service by telling the true story of Annie Get Your Gun and giving Frank credit for being a supportive husband, giving Sitting Bull credit for the immense work that he did for this country on trying to find peace within all of us. I think Buffalo Bill deserves credit for him trying to rewrite parts of history. And then I think that Annie deserves credit for the wild feminist work that she did in her time. And so I can't wait for that day when we can make it happen.
I think your mom might be crying over there.
Oh.
Thank you guys so much. I can't tell you like how much, us not being able to do what we do best right now, getting to talk about musical theater with you guys, it's just fantastic. And it makes my heart so warm to have had this discussion with all of you. High five. Michael Weber, it's all you, man.
We hope you enjoyed this Movie Musical Monday podcast and that you'll join us live to participate in our next discussion. You'll find information about upcoming events on our website and how you can join in the conversation. Theaters across the country need your support now, more than ever. We hope you'll consider a donation to Porchlight Music Theater today. Just go to porchlightmusictheater.org. Until next time on Movie Musical Mondays, I'm Michael Weber.